You don't need chemicals to grow food.
What would you do if someone told you it was impossible to grow anything in pure desert sand? Most people would walk away. But John Graham, a 30-year veteran of desert agriculture, saw something different when he looked at the barren landscape of Baja California's most challenging terrain. Where others saw worthless sand, he saw potential for the greenest oasis in the region. This wasn't just another farming experiment. This was about proving that ancient agricultural wisdom, combined with modern organic techniques, could transform the most hostile environments into thriving ecosystems. And he was about to do it in just 3 months. What if I told you that this same method that transformed barren desert sand into California's most productive organic farmland is now being used by hundreds of farmers across the Southwest, and that agricultural scientists believe it could hold the key to feeding millions of people in the world's most challenging desert regions? Today, as California faces its worst drought in over 1,200 years, and agricultural land continues to be abandoned due to water scarcity, there's a growing realization that our approach to desert agriculture may have been completely wrong. While modern farming relies on massive irrigation systems and chemical inputs that often fail in arid conditions, John Graham's method works with the desert, not against it. Stay until the end because today, you're going to discover how this revolutionary approach to desert farming is being adopted across California and the Southwest, and why experts believe it could transform millions of acres of abandoned land into productive agricultural oases. Welcome to Forgotten Lands. In 1995, John Graham stood in the middle of what locals called the most worthless piece of land in Baja California. The property was nothing but shifting sand dunes, scattered rocks, and the occasional dead shrub. The previous owner had tried for years to grow anything on this land and had given up completely. Real estate agents wouldn't even show it to potential buyers. It was, by every measure, agricultural wasteland. But Graham saw something different. Having spent years studying traditional farming methods used by indigenous peoples throughout Mexico and the American Southwest, he recognized that this worthless land had all the basic elements needed for a thriving agricultural system. It just needed to be unlocked using techniques that had been forgotten for generations. The challenge was enormous. The sand had virtually no organic matter, no water retention capacity, and no established ecosystem to support plant growth. Temperatures regularly exceeded 110 degrees Fahrenheit during the day and dropped dramatically at night. Annual rainfall was less than 4 inches, and what little rain did fall would immediately drain through the sand without providing any benefit to plants. Most agricultural experts would have recommended massive soil amendments, expensive irrigation systems, and years of preparation before attempting to grow anything. Graham had a different plan. He was going to use a combination of ancient indigenous techniques and modern organic principles to transform this desert sand into fertile soil in just 3 months. If you're amazed by this challenge so far, comment Oasis below and let me know what you think could happen in just 90 days with the right approach. Graham's method was based on 3 fundamental principles that indigenous farmers had used successfully for thousands of years in similar environments. First, he would create microclimates that could capture and retain moisture. Second, he would introduce beneficial microorganisms that could begin the process of soil creation. And third, he would establish plant communities that could support each other and gradually improve the growing conditions. The first step was creating what Graham called moisture traps. Using nothing but locally available materials, rocks, dead plant matter, and strategic earthworks, he began creating small depressions and barriers that would capture the minimal rainfall and morning dew. These weren't complex irrigation systems requiring pumps or external water sources. They were simple, elegant solutions that worked with natural water cycles. Next came the introduction of beneficial microorganisms. Graham had learned from traditional farmers that healthy soil is essentially a living ecosystem, and that this ecosystem could be jump-started by introducing the right combination of bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms. He created what he called soil starter cultures, using compost, local plant materials, and specific combinations of organic matter that would feed these beneficial organisms. The third element was strategic plant selection and placement. Rather than trying to grow conventional crops immediately, Graham started with hardy, drought-resistant plants that could survive in the harsh conditions while beginning to improve the soil. These pioneer plants would create shade, add organic matter as they shed leaves and roots, and gradually create the conditions needed for more sensitive crops. But here's where Graham's approach became truly revolutionary. Instead of working against the desert environment, he designed his system to take advantage of the unique characteristics of desert conditions. The intense heat that made farming seem impossible actually accelerated the decomposition of organic matter and the establishment of beneficial microorganisms. The dramatic temperature swings created natural condensation that his moisture traps could capture. Even the sandy soil, which seemed like a disadvantage, provided excellent drainage that prevented root rot and other problems common in more traditional farming environments. Within the first month, something remarkable began to happen. The moisture traps were working exactly as designed, capturing and retaining water that would have otherwise been lost. The soil starter cultures were establishing themselves, and the first signs of biological activity were becoming visible. The pioneer plants were not just surviving but beginning to thrive, creating small pockets of green in the otherwise barren landscape. By the second month, the transformation was becoming dramatic. The pioneer plants had created enough organic matter and shade to support the introduction of more diverse plant species. The soil was beginning to develop structure and water retention capacity. Most importantly, the system was becoming self-sustaining. Each element was supporting and strengthening the others. If this story is inspiring you to think differently about what's possible in desert environments, hit that like button and subscribe to Forgotten Lands for more stories of ancient wisdom solving modern agricultural challenges. But it was in the third month that the true miracle occurred. Graham introduced his first food crops, vegetables and herbs that would have been impossible to grow in the original sand. Not only did they survive, they thrived. The tomatoes were larger and more flavorful than those grown in traditional soil. The herbs were more aromatic and potent. The leafy greens were more nutritious and grew faster than anyone had thought possible. The secret was that Graham hadn't just created soil. He had created a complete ecosystem. The beneficial microorganisms were providing nutrients to the plants in forms that were immediately available. The moisture retention system was providing consistent water without the need for constant irrigation. The plant communities were supporting each other, with some providing shade, others fixing nitrogen, and still others attracting beneficial insects. Word of Graham's success spread quickly throughout the agricultural community. Scientists from universities across California and Mexico came to study his methods. Agricultural extension agents brought farmers to see the transformation firsthand. What they found challenged everything they thought they knew about desert agriculture. Dr. Maria Santos, a soil scientist from UC Davis who studied Graham's site, was amazed by what she discovered. In just 3 months, John had created soil that had better structure, higher organic matter content, and more biological activity than farmland that had been cultivated for decades, she explained. The microbial diversity was extraordinary. We found beneficial organisms that we rarely see, even in the most carefully managed organic farms. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Graham's success was its scalability. The techniques he had developed didn't require expensive equipment, external inputs, or specialized knowledge that would be difficult to replicate. Everything he had done could be accomplished by any farmer willing to learn and apply these principles. Over the following years, Graham began teaching his methods to other farmers throughout Baja California and Southern California. The results were consistently impressive. Farmers who had struggled with poor soil, water scarcity, and low yields found that Graham's approach not only solved these problems but actually improved their profitability. The economic benefits were substantial and measurable. Because the system was largely self-sustaining, ongoing costs were minimal compared to conventional desert agriculture attempts. The improved soil structure and water retention meant that irrigation requirements were dramatically reduced, in some cases by up to 80% compared to traditional farming methods in similar conditions. The enhanced biological activity meant that expensive fertilizers and pesticides were unnecessary, eliminating costs that often made desert farming economically unviable. And the superior quality of the produce meant that farmers could command premium prices in organic markets, often 30 to 50% higher than conventionally grown crops. The financial transformation was as dramatic as the physical one. Farmers who had been struggling to break even found themselves with profitable operations within their first growing season. The reduced input costs, combined with premium pricing for high-quality organic produce, created profit margins that were often double or triple what they had achieved with conventional methods. But the environmental benefits were equally impressive and far-reaching. The transformation of desert sand into productive farmland was actually sequestering carbon from the atmosphere at rates that surprised even climate scientists. Dr. James Rodriguez, a carbon sequestration researcher from Arizona State University, found that Graham's transformed plots were storing carbon at rates comparable to established forests. We're seeing soil carbon levels increase by 200 to 300% in the first year alone, he noted. This isn't just sustainable agriculture, it's regenerative agriculture that's actually improving the environment. The increased biological activity was supporting wildlife that had been absent from these areas for decades. Birds, beneficial insects, and small mammals began returning to areas that had been biological deserts. The improved water retention was reducing erosion and helping to recharge local groundwater supplies, creating positive effects that extended far beyond the farm boundaries. Perhaps most importantly, the success was creating a ripple effect throughout the region. As word spread about the dramatic transformations possible with these methods, more farmers began experimenting with similar approaches. Agricultural extension services started incorporating Graham's principles into their recommendations. Universities began offering courses on desert permaculture and sustainable arid land agriculture. Today, more than 25 years after that first 3-month transformation, Graham's methods are being used by hundreds of farmers across the American Southwest. Agricultural researchers are studying his techniques and developing ways to apply them on larger scales. Government agencies are incorporating his principles into land restoration programs. The implications are staggering and continue to grow as more research validates Graham's approach. Across California, Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico, there are millions of acres of land that are currently considered unsuitable for agriculture due to poor soil, water scarcity, or extreme conditions. Conservative estimates suggest that at least 15 million acres of currently unused land in the Southwest could potentially be transformed using variations of Graham's methods. If even a fraction of this land could be transformed using these techniques, it could revolutionize food production in the American Southwest and provide food security for millions of people. The timing couldn't be more critical, as traditional agricultural regions face increasing challenges from drought, heat, and changing weather patterns. The ability to create productive farmland in previously unusable areas could be crucial for food security. The Colorado River, which supplies water to 40 million people across 7 states, is at its lowest levels in recorded history. Traditional farming regions in California's Central Valley are experiencing unprecedented water restrictions. Meanwhile, climate change is making extreme weather events more frequent and severe, putting additional stress on conventional agricultural systems. Climate scientists are particularly excited about the potential of Graham's methods to address these challenges. Dr. Sarah Chen, a climate adaptation researcher at Stanford University, has been studying the scalability of desert transformation techniques. What John Graham demonstrated in Baja California represents a paradigm shift in how we think about agriculture and climate adaptation, she explains. These methods don't just work despite climate change. They actually help mitigate it by sequestering carbon and creating more resilient ecosystems. The carbon sequestration potential alone is remarkable. Early studies suggest that widespread adoption of these techniques could remove millions of tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere annually, while simultaneously increasing food production. This represents a rare win-win scenario in the fight against climate change, a solution that addresses both mitigation and adaptation simultaneously. International attention is also growing. Agricultural delegations from countries facing similar challenges, including Australia, Israel, Morocco, and Chile, have visited Graham's original site and the farms of his students to learn these techniques. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization has begun incorporating similar principles into their recommendations for sustainable agriculture in arid regions. The transformation that began with one man's vision of turning worthless desert sand into a thriving oasis has become a movement that could reshape how we think about agriculture in arid regions worldwide. It's a perfect example of how ancient wisdom, when combined with modern understanding and determination, can solve problems that seem impossible with conventional approaches. But perhaps the most important lesson from Graham's work is that sustainability and profitability don't have to be mutually exclusive. In fact, His methods demonstrate that the most environmentally beneficial approaches can also be the most economically viable. This challenges the common assumption that environmental protection requires economic sacrifice, showing instead that working with natural systems can be more profitable than working against them. John Graham's 3-month miracle in the California desert wasn't just about growing food in sand. It was about proving that with the right approach, the most challenging environments can become the most productive. It was about showing that sustainability and profitability don't have to be mutually exclusive. And it was about demonstrating that sometimes the solutions to our most pressing problems can be found not in complex technology, but in the wisdom of those who came before us. As we face an uncertain future with increasing environmental challenges and growing food security concerns, the lessons from that transformed patch of desert sand in Baja California offer hope. They remind us that with knowledge, determination, and respect for natural systems, we can turn our greatest challenges into our greatest opportunities. The desert sand that once seemed worthless has become California's greenest oasis, and the methods that made it possible are now spreading across the Southwest, transforming landscapes and lives one farm at a time. The revolution that started with 3 months in the desert is just beginning.